We are thrilled to welcome on now for the second time of the award-winning, game-changing, #1 ranked fantasy footballers podcast, Mr. Mike Wright. You can find him at FF Hitman. Mike, thanks so much for coming on. How you doing today, man?
Oh man, we're inching closer to football.
Yes.
So doing better than I was a month ago. I watched basketball last night, and there was a couple, and the games were actually pretty good. I mean, they're a little bit sloppy, but as I would expect, the first game back. But so I got to watch some live sports. That was pretty freaking sweet, man.
Exactly, yeah. It finally feels like the world is somewhat not normalizing, but yes, a little taste of something,
Just a little bit of joy is okay to have.
Exactly. And hopefully, fingers crossed we keep that with football this season. We'll see. But, man, and we finally got like a nugget that actually mattered, Damian Williams and, obviously unfortunate circumstances, but him sitting out, it's like we have some news to finally grasp to. It's been such a weird offseason. So it has been one of those weeks where there's kind of like a light finally there. I totally agree. But we're thrilled to have you on, man. I just wanted to make sure before we get into this awesome interview we have planned, we're going to be talking about breakouts today. We'll talk about what that actually means, what's the definition of a breakout, all that a little bit later. Of course, I'm going to pick Mike's brain like I do with all the Wolves to kind of learn about his process and all that. Before we dive in, I did just want to make sure to promote the Ultimate Draft Kit. If you somehow have not already gotten this, it's been out for a while and it keeps getting updated. They make it very clear what updates are coming in, which is awesome. It's only $30. And it is incredible. I mean, the podcast has been great, but this tool is so good. You get the rankings, projections, tons of analysis. I love the reception perception, exclusive, access to Matt Harmon's great work, some awesome research tools. I'm so impressed how clean those research tools are laid out. Just so easy to digest and see such crucial information in the blink of an eye. So everything's so easy digestible. Plus, if you like videos, video profiles on everybody, it's like tailor-made to whatever your style of learning and studying is. And I love it, man. So anybody out there, $30, it's a steal. If you haven't already done it, make sure you check that out. It's fantastic.
Well, thank you, sir. Thank you. Yes. Appreciate that.
Oh, 100%. I wouldn't say it with such enthusiasm if it wasn't, I can't BS, and it is just an absolute gem, dude. It is so good. But now we are going to move into that portion where we just kind of pick Mike's brain a little bit for the next 15, 20 minutes or so and just kind of learn about his path. What's kind of your path been to this fantasy industry? Obviously, you guys are huge now. And then what kind of advice do you also have for other people based on your journey?
So, how did it all happen?
Yeah.
Pixie dust, basically. No, so what happened was we all worked together for a video game company. Everything started to go south, and people were looking for new stuff. Andy and I had fantasy football was the passion. Andy and I had done a podcast for just our league and decided to screw it. Let's try a podcast for everybody. We were awful. The podcast was terrible. We fixed some things. The podcast was consumable. And then the job thing really hit, and we brought Jason in and just said, how awesome would it be if we now do fantasy football full time while everyone's looking for other work? Like the other two guys were in real estate class as I'm feeding them, in the beginning, man, we would track downloads by the hour. I would go in and we'd be like, guys, we got 10 downloads this hour. We would all be freaking out. So they did that. I'm off doing music stuff, trying to make beard oil. I was just trying to figure it all out. And then we connected with people, and the snowball started to go down the mountain, and people appreciated what we were doing, and we just kept going from there.
What do you think it was that, and I have my answer to that question because I really love listening to your pod and the way you do connect with listeners, but is there a certain way that just makes you guys that much more connectable, or any advice you have? What is that kind of pixie dust that makes it so easy to connect with you guys, do you think?
Sure. It's funny because, we've talked about when we started the podcast, I know it's hard for people to really remember what it was like because, one, it wasn't that long ago, but it was that long ago in terms of podcasting. for fantasy football, you had ESPN, you had CBS putting out great shows. I believe Football Guys, they had their podcast, and there was a couple other the fantasy football guys. I mean, there's some out there, but there really wasn't a ton. Like now, there are so many fantasy football podcasts, but at the time there just wasn't a ton of options that had people caring about their audio, people caring about the show being entertaining, as well as bringing good information. So that was kind of the pillars that we built the show on, those three things.
Yeah.
And I honestly, I feel like where people connected is just we were able to create take our authentic friendship, where we had been friends for a decade now. We've been talking about fantasy football, and we were able to translate that onto a microphone, where we aren't three people from a business that have been put into a room together. We're three friends who decided to do it. We get to be in the same room, where online has improved drastically. We're able to do this interview, but if we were in the same room, there would be a different energy, a different connection. True. And it's not something you can tangibly feel physically, but you can feel it inside. You just know a conversation is different in the way that people can interact and react, physical cues, all these types of things. So I think it's just that fact that we had an authentic friendship and we have fun doing the show. People like fun. People want to be involved in fun. If I'm watching that's what TV is, man. I'm watching people have fun on TV. So we were able to take that, idea of people like fantasy football, people like fun, people also like winning. So, and have thankfully been able to help people win as well. So you combine all that into a little porridge. And I think that's kind of why people have connected so much with the show.
I do think that is exactly what you're saying is what you feel when you listen to the Fantasy Footballers podcast. It is just some buddies talking about ball. And I think that is probably definitely the way it separates and is so different from anything else. And the energy that you guys can feel in person, that it all makes total sense. And so the next question I always like to ask the Fantasy Wolves who've been coming on here is, as you approach a new season, do you kind of have any routines or best practices you kind of follow you'd recommend, whether it's for player evaluations, rankings, any of that? What do you consider some routines you have every season?
Let's see. So the routines I would have, there's stat stuff. Like I'll make my kind of like master stat sheet, but I do that as the season goes along. And that I think more tangible for people would be like, I have my master player notes doc. I make one every single year. It's always daunting when February hits and you open that clean sheet and you go, oh, I gotta do this. We're gonna do this again. And then you push through that. And so we're doing shows all year long. So as I'm building up, a statistical argument for a player, I make sure I go put that back into my master player sheet so that I have everything in one location. It's real easy just to Apple F during a conversation of like, oh crap, I forgot I had this thing here. So I think that's the biggest thing, is making sure you have a unified area for all your information. You're not just spread out all over the place. I hate when I miss a nugget from our show doc. It's the document for the actual podcast, and I don't move that over. Then it's like, that stat is now lost to the history of time.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's a great point. I've always followed something similar, even way back in like high school when I wasn't doing it for any type of show or rankings. I would just always copy the Roto World blurbs, under a player's name.
Oh yeah, there you go.
Rankings, like similar process, like you're saying, just dump it all into the same type of place. This is obviously an interesting season to prepare for, no doubt, with everything going on in the world. As we said, we finally got some light of hope, but still COVID-19, you have to have it on your mind as an owner. I mean, we could obviously look at the doomsday season's canceled angle. Let's kind of ignore that and assume, we're going to get 16 games. But if that's the case, is there any way you're kind of adjusting your rankings and process because of COVID, or are you just kind of keeping it as it would be normally?
It's just normal for me. I don't know. Like, I don't even, honestly, I have no idea what I could possibly change about. I mean, maybe you need depth
Right.
more than that might be more important. But the truth is we don't know. You know, like you could have someone who takes that strategy of, I'm going to load up on depth. I'm going to bypass a handful of real upside sleepers at the end of the draft to make sure I got my backup running backs. I have these safer guys. And then we get in the season and they actually had a pretty good handle on it. And we have minimal infection spread, minimal players missing time. And then your team is this floor team compared to someone else who went ceiling and they're hitting. So I'm not actively changing anything of my actual draft strategy. We had the discussion with our league. What are we going to do?
Yeah.
And we kind of went with the agreement of, we have 2 IR spots when we play. Normally, I think we're 5 bench, 2 IR spots. And I said, look, man, you max out that IR. We understand. We have a gentleman's agreement. 2 of those IR spots are for what they're for. The other ones are just all COVID related. The second someone gets put on the COVID list, you slap them in there. We don't play this bullcrap game of, well, now I have to hold a player for I don't know how long because COVID has ruined it. I made the diatribe on the show of COVID has ruined enough for us. I don't need it in November popping up to be this situation where I have 3 players that I can't possibly drop and now it's all screwed up. Like, no, man, just adjust the best that we possibly can and have it not minimize the negative impact that it's going to bring. It's going to have an impact. We all know it will, but minimize the negative impact that it can possibly have for your fantasy football team.
I need to make sure my entire league mates listen to that rant because it seems like for whatever reason they're all on the fence. We have like our usual, early April owners meeting, and it's like we gotta keep adjusting the rules. I get we made rules in April, but we're dealing with a pandemic. Like nobody's ever seen this in fantasy. Like, how are we being inflexible
for this?
Right?
Yeah,
exactly.
Exactly.
So,
yeah.
So let's get it, together so it's minimized. I think it's a great way to look at it. In terms of just in general, all the different factors can go into fantasy success, whether it's talent, usage, the team, and the surrounding talent around a player, or the scheme they're all in. There's so many different things. Do you kind of weigh any of those factors greater than the other? Like if you were creating a formula of some kind?
Man. It starts with opportunity drives everything for fantasy football. So that's the number one thing you are trying to find is who has the locked in opportunity, who has the path to opportunity, whose opportunity is going to rise. Like that's honestly where everything stems from. Okay. And then we get into, do they have the talent to succeed? Like looking at the tight end position is so indicative of this. Like we all want the big super athlete. We want OJ Howard to succeed. Look, because look at his measurables on paper. This dude is a superhero. He has to hit. And what was his opportunity going to be? And that scenario played out. The Bruce Arians tight end narrative came to fruition, and it didn't work out. The opportunity wasn't there for him. Meanwhile, you have guys like Jack Doyle who are ultimate dad runners, like, but he gets a bunch of targets. He gets a bunch of opportunities. So it all starts with opportunity. Then we'll figure out what's the ceiling going to be, because we know, like for that example, take OJ Howard, put him on the Colts in Jack Doyle's position with Phillip Rivers. I think OJ Howard will be a better fantasy player than Jack Doyle. But Jack Doyle's got the opportunity. So we'll start there.
Absolutely. And I just want to reiterate again with the Ultimate Draft Kit, the way you guys like visualize, it's last year's opportunity. As you said, opportunity changes and we have to track those changes, but just seeing how certain players were used, whether it's the market share resource, whether it's the targets, like it's stuff you could find on the internet, but the way you guys lay it out is just, again, probably the cleanest presentation I've seen out there. I
appreciate that, man.
So that's just another way. Everybody kind of, that question, everybody seems to start with opportunity, as they should. And I still think, you guys have one of the best ways of presenting it. So those are some of my favorite tools from the Ultimate Draft Kit. Are there any others that you have as personal favorites? Or if somebody's still not convinced and doesn't have the draft guide yet, are there other tools that you really like about the Ultimate Draft Kit?
Yeah, our biggest upgrade last year was we finally had an app. We had gotten to the point where we were able to bring in a full-time programmer. He absolutely crushed it.
Awesome.
And then the app, I mean, because we're a small company, so we're very nimble. It started as, okay, it's going to be the app version so that you can consume the information on mobile, which is very difficult to translate things that need a giant monitor to, okay, well, it's just on the app. And then somewhere along the lines, we injected that you could use it during a draft. Not, it doesn't plug in like some other people have the fancy system where it goes in, but like you can track when players have been drafted in our tiered rankings and you have your custom scoring as well, but track who's being drafted, highlight players so you don't forget them. And that was, we knew it was going to be very handy and useful, but then we all threw it on our iPads and it was fantastic, man. It made the drafting process just much easier for us.
That's awesome. And it does look great on mobile. I will just reiterate that too. And I live, 5 minutes from the beach, and it's been really nice to be able to just kind of have my phone out. Like I want to take a break from
cool flex, bro. Live by the beach. Get out of here.
It's a pretty good life. I'm not going to complain over here in the North Shore of Mass. It's not too bad. And it's just been nice to have some great fantasy analysis that I'm not like loading a bunch of websites. I just have the app in my phone, load up the draft guide, watch a couple videos with my headphones on. It's been great. Nice. So I totally reiterate all of that. And the last question before we get into this breakout feature segment, are there any other analysts that you really would recommend, whether they're big guys, small guys, doesn't really matter, that you just kind of consider some other wolves in the industry right now?
Sure. Well, I mean, you have Scott on. It seems like you got your BFF connected with Scott Barrett. I love Scott.
He's awesome.
But JJ Zacharyson from Number Fire, he's not my Sherpa that he knows of. I mean, I'm really good friends with JJ now, but back when he wrote his PDF, the late round quarterback,
yes,
that kind of was like this bomb that was dropped in my brain of, well, maybe we need to look at things a little bit differently. So, and he's always crushing. His podcast is incredible. I try not to miss it. But it's very consumable, and he's a very analytical dude. So if you're looking for right to the point analysis, that JJ is always the guy I recommend.
So digestible. And you're like, out of, I think 10 or 12 I've had on this summer, I think almost every single one has mentioned just the digestibility of his content, which is just, he is a beast. I got to get him on here. That's got to be my next goal. Yeah. Somehow got to land him. He'd be a blast.
Great.
Yeah.
He's great. And check out, we just relaunched our DFS podcast with our editor, Kyle Borgononi, who we call the Borgogan. Or Kate Borg. We call him a bunch of stuff, but he like, people don't know him because he's a behind the scenes guy, but he is super sharp. He helps out with making our show docs. He goes through, he files in a bunch of like cool stats that we hadn't thought of yet. Him, and then Matthew Betts, who is a licensed physical therapist, and he's jumping in that that fantasy football injury game, which is awesome that we're seeing a rise in these doctors, or he's not a doctorate. I don't want to speak out of term, but like people who work with injuries, analyzing injuries. So we're really excited that Betts writes for us, and he's on the DFS podcast now. So those are two guys I would go give a follow on Twitter.
Be sure to check them out. We'll make sure to link those guys also into the show notes when we produce our own show notes here for this episode. So listeners, be sure to check out the show notes, ffbdpod.com, if you want to make sure to follow all these great recommendations. Alrighty, the last couple of questions are kind of centered around the recent shows you guys have been releasing before we get to those breakouts that we keep alluding to here. I love the one of the most unique shows I thought I've listened to this entire offseason was where you drafted, it was zero RB versus heavy RB. And you guys went head to head with two of like the biggest Twitter debate right now is it zero RB or do you go robust running back? And I loved it. I know you were on the zero, running back side.
Yeah, that was the hand I was dealt. Yes.
Yes, exactly. Now, after the fact, were there any kind of big key takeaways, lessons, like I'll never go zero RB? What was kind of like what did you learn after that pod?
Well, I'll start with this. Like, so I was the zero RB drafter, and I don't know. This isn't a strategy I have ever implemented in one of my drafts. I know of it because Sean Siegel started it. Sean Siegel from Roto Viz. Maybe you want to talk about another sharp, like, see, when Siegel's talking, like, I'm like, I don't understand what you're saying. You're too smart. He was just on with Pete Overzet, and it was incredible. It was like an hour and a half, and I'm like, this dude is unbelievable. But anyway, so I don't know if he would have approved of the implementation I went with, because I ended up taking a running back in the 5th round or something like that, or 6, because Raheem Mostert was there, and it was like the RB draft for him. He's like, I can't pass up what has just happened here. I mean, the takeaways were that both are very valid ways of drafting. I favor getting the running backs this year, the heavy RB in the early rounds, and I don't know, when we get to actual draft time, how sustainable is that going to be if everybody is doing it, because then your tiers of running back is going to eliminate much, much quicker. Meanwhile, all of a sudden you're like, Julio Jones is there in the 2nd round, or I can get a tier 3 running back. So that'll be a difficult thing once the real draft is actually happening. And I'm talking about like my home leagues. So, but the heavier RB has been my preferred route for the drafts I've done, like Scotty Fishbowl, some eliminators, and other things like that.
Totally agree. I'm definitely on team heavy RB, but as you say, I think it's tough to just lock in a mindset too. As you're saying, if Julio Jones is there mid-second, like I wanted to go heavy RB. I understand that receivers deep this year, and I could find guys later. But yes, you got to have that flexible mindset too. I totally agree.
Yes, you do.
But yeah, I do find myself often going, honestly, 3 running backs in a row to start a lot of drafts, as long as there's a flex, because getting those bell cows, there's something about it. They're the best. There's nothing better than a good bell cow.
That's true.
I feel like the last time I had you on, it was a couple of years back, and it was Saquon. It was a rookie that year. We were both kind of salivating over the future of the bell cow position and how he was going to just add to that. And clearly that worked out too.
Yeah, he came through.
Yeah, he certainly did. And the last question about the pods, recently you guys have been doing kind of divisional breakdowns, which has been, again, I love that series you guys seem to do every year. Did you have like whether it's a single division you enjoyed diving into or like a big takeaway that kind of just stood out after you've been going through all these? What would you say, either a single division or the biggest takeaway so far?
Well, it was pretty fun. I don't think we did it on the first division, but then we started giving the record for teams in a 1-score game, and it's really wild. We know that the margin of victory in the NFL, we naturally know that it's a lot, and the 1-score stat isn't something we came up with. It gets mentioned a lot, but when you really start highlighting it for every team, that thin layer between they were an early draft pick and being a playoff team for so many of these teams is just so paper thin. It's unbelievable how close teams really are, because you start to get jaded of like, oh, this team, they suck, they always suck, and then you realize, oh, well, they were 2-8 in 1-score games, so the ball bounces the right way, 2 times in these games, and all of a sudden they're a winning team. So that was pretty wild when we were breaking that stuff down.
Absolutely. That is a great point, and something that's really entertaining to listen to with those as well. Well, at this point, let's move into the featured segment here, the breakouts.
Let's do it.
And I feel like there's so many different terms kind of tossed around in fantasy. You got your sleepers, your values, your busts, that sometimes the lines can get blurred if you don't clearly define them. That's one thing I do like about the draft guide is you guys say, this is what we're looking at in this exact position. These are the players you're going to find here. So in kind of your eyes, what is the definition of a breakout?
Sure. A breakout for fantasy football to me is a player that takes a jump. Like, they can either be a non-factor for fantasy purposes and they become a wide receiver 3. Like, that's not the breakout that people are looking for, but to me that is a breakout. It's somebody that is going to take a step up in tiered value, and generally you're predicting like at least a couple tier jumps for this player.
Absolutely. And as you in the guide too, you guys say it's often becomes like the next fantasy darling. You're looking at like the Godwins, even Dalvin Cook, round 2 running back becomes a top 5
that was still
the
a
next
tier
year.
jump. Yeah.
Still a big tier jump. Right. So there are different layers to it, but yeah, that fantasy darling term, someone that's like not necessarily a sleeper, not just a late round guy, but somebody that could have been an early guy that just takes that next leap. So these guys could come from all over the draft as we're talking. We're going to go position by position and just kind of give a pick for each one. We'll start at the top with quarterbacks. Who's your favorite breakout quarterback for 2020?
It's Kyler Murray.
Yeah.
It's not just me that's touting Kyler Murray, but he's still my favorite to be the breakout, where generally speaking, I don't like to take a quarterback in the early rounds, but I think Kyler Murray will have a good opportunity to finish as a top 3 quarterback, he can finish as the number 1 guy. That's in the range of outcomes to me for Kyler Murray, and you're not drafting him in the second round like Lamar and Patrick Mahomes. So I like Kyler Murray. You have last year he was already good for fantasy purposes. He came through as a rookie, which is a very difficult thing for rookie quarterbacks to do, but he has the unfair advantage of being able to run, over 500 yards on the ground, which is nothing compared to Lamar Jackson, but 500 yards is a lot, because you can look at the fact that he runs and had pretty good yardage through the air. We have only 6 quarterbacks who have thrown for over 3,500 yards and rushed for over 500 yards. And Kyler is now on that list like that. And it's guys that were great for fantasy: Randall Cunningham, Culpepper, Russ, Watson. Like, these are really heavy hitters. He had a 3.7 touchdown rate, or 3.7% of his attempts turned into touchdowns. That's very low. If you're not familiar with that stat, that's unbelievably low. The average of quarterbacks with 300 attempts, 4.7. Like, so you're talking about a very positive regression for Kyler Murray in the touchdown area. And then you have, since the year 2000, this is similar to the 3,500 yards, but it's only 2 quarterbacks since the year 2000 have run the ball more than 100 times and thrown the ball more than 500 times. Culpepper, who was the QB1 that year, Cam Newton was the quarterback 4. That's in the range of outcomes for Kyler Murray and the Arizona pace of play. We saw it. They talked about it all offseason. Speed. They came out. They're running plays like absolute maniacs, turning David Johnson into a fantasy stud for the first 8 weeks before he evaporates. And I like Kyler Murray in that, taking the second step. Oh, yeah, he also has DeAndre Hopkins now.
Exactly. I think all those points are all completely valid, completely fantastic. I mean, just the positive regression, even if there weren't any real changes, was already in line, as you said. It just also, too, the second year in the system, the air raid, this new offense, Cliff Kingsbury's first time ever as an NFL coach. It's always just that kind of second year. You see those leaps so many times. It happened, Mahomes didn't really play much as a rookie, but, Lamar, Mahomes had a little bit of experience. And then, the second year where the game simplifies, then you add in, as you said, DeAndre Hopkins, maybe that was why the air raid didn't necessarily hit its peak, because they didn't have that true go-to guy, contested situation or broken plays where he could just legitimately chuck it up. I love Larry Fitz. I love his career, but at this stage, he's clearly on his back 9, and Kirk's a great, in my opinion, number 2. But now that they have all of these guys, plus
he was also hurt. Kirk had an ankle problem for the majority of last year.
Exactly. So now a healthy Kirk drawing secondary coverage and not first coverage because of Hopkins. I mean, that offense could be extremely tough to stop. Kenyan Drake as well. Some of Murray's best games came once Drake was in the offense. So everything does seem to be really lining up. Just naturally was due for a step forward. And now all these other great pieces added around, a couple line improvements too. I'm fully aboard the breakout train. I think a lot of people are, but it doesn't mean it's wrong, because it's a great call.
We all loved Godwin last year, and
it was right.
And we didn't love him enough, it turns out.
I could totally see that being the case with Kyler. It's like, yeah, we all knew he was going to break out, but then the next year he's going in like round 2, kind of like the Lamars and Mahomes.
Right.
I totally agree with that. I think it's a great call. My pick this year, it's kind of a guy who had a mini breakout a few seasons ago, is Carson Wentz.
Ooh, all right. So you're going to have to talk me into this one.
Oh, are you a Wentz hater over there? Okay.
No, I am a Wentz meh.
Yeah, meh.
It's just like, okay.
Yeah.
He's there.
It's so, to me, it's all starts with the revamped weapons. I mean, this guy was the quarterback 9 last year, throwing to no receiver top 500 yards. So, I mean, legitimately nothing there out wide. And you look back at 2017, he didn't have a ton either when that happened. But the key difference I see with that offense and what we've seen the last 2 seasons was he had somebody that could really lift the lid. Torrey Smith, who's nothing special, but he at least commands the deep ball attention. He kind of opens everything up for the tight ends and everyone. Last year, they just could play so tight to the line defenses and really just kind of take out without having that real vertical threat. I mean, Greg Lewis was his like number 1 receiver for the last half of the season, last quarter of the season there. So now you add Jalen Reagor, you have Deshaun Jackson ideally healthy as well. That is speed. That is plenty of lid lifting ability right there. I just think the whole kind of offense opens back up. They've already talked, Howie Roseman about the reason they targeted speed over Jefferson when addressing, why Reagor over Justin Jefferson was we want to get back to those big plays, attacking vertically. And Wentz does throw a great deep ball when he's got the ammunition there. I mean, he was on pace for 41 touchdowns that year over those 13 games. In those 13 games, only one time was he not top 12. He was over 60% of the time he was top 5, and he was top 2 in 4 of those 13 games as well. So there's a kind of like Wentz is this floor guy, and there's not a real ceiling. He's kind of a made guy, I think, is what a lot of people see him as. But to me, now that they're going to have all the pieces to operate the offense as it was just a few seasons ago, and we saw what he was doing, I think we see him break back out to those levels, and a lot of people aren't aware of it.
Oh, all right.
Decent case, or is that you still?
No, you're good. You're good. You're like, it's yeah. So what's hard for me on the going with that, it's not that it's an incorrect analysis or anything. It's if you're betting on Carson Wentz, then I'm betting on the weapons instead of betting on the player. You know what I mean? Where it's like, dude, Deshaun Jackson is one of my favorite late round picks. It's insane what he could do, what you saw him do in one game with Carson Wentz. But he does get hurt a lot. He's still returning from the injury. Yep. Jalen Reagor is a rookie. Love the prospect, but NFL talent scouts, they miss a lot. So you're betting on Reagor, which it's a fair bet. You're betting on Alshon Jeffrey, who's probably going to start the season on the pup. That's all I'm saying. I don't know if I want to make that full bet on the Eagles wide receivers, and I could look the fool absolutely by this time next year.
There are a lot of warts with those guys. None of them are locks to stay. And I did feel even better when Marquise Goodwin was a part of it. I know he's opted out since, because I was like, okay, there's 3 potential lid lifters now here, and that has been down to 2 now. So it is a little more worrisome if the other 2 don't pan out. Then this pick is washed. And Wentz also has some injury concerns himself too. So there certainly are some warts with him. I just really hope at least one of them, like you said, that first week with Deshaun Jackson, that was Wentz's best game of the year. He didn't reach those fantasy totals again. So if just one of those 2, Reagor or Deshaun Jackson, could pan out, and imagine both do, then we're really talking about an offense that could cook. What about running back? Probably the most important position in fantasy, and especially when you find that guy who takes the leap into the next tier. Who are you thinking for a breakout running back this year?
So, man, I don't want to just keep running back the Cardinals since we had Kyler. So I really like Drake. My favorite stat for the Arizona Cardinals running backs is if you were able to predict the starter for the team, which was granted very difficult some of the times. Like when they say that David Johnson's healthy, he's going to go, and then Chase Edmonds rips off a monster game. But the starting running back for Arizona was the running back 3 overall. and it's Kenyan Drake now. So they gave him like $10 million. And they were doing that before they even knew they were going to be able to trade David Johnson away.
Yeah.
They had made the commitment that Drake's going to be back. Drake's going to be the guy. He projected out much lower than I thought he was going to. You know, when it was just the off season of I'm ranking guys, Kenyan Drake's going to be top 10. You know, and I think he actually sits like number 14 in my projections right now, which I don't like. I feel like that is much too low. So I, along with Jason, so Jason on the Fantasy Footballers is probably Kenyan Drake's number one fan and has been since the beginning of time. You know, since he was drafted. But I don't see a world where Kenyan Drake fails. So let's put it that way. Yes, injury. Look, I'm not doing that crap. Everybody can get hurt.
Right.
I'm saying on the field, I don't see a way that Kenyan Drake can truly fail you in terms of performance. I don't see a world where all of a sudden Kingsbury says, well, Chase Edmonds, Kenyan Drake, 50-50. Like, I just don't see that happening when you consider they traded for him in the middle of the season, and then he was immediately the guy and was immediately awesome against San Francisco, one of the toughest rush defenses in the league at that point. So I really like him, and I'll throw out Josh Jacobs as well. I know there's a question coming up that's probably going to be answered Josh Jacobs as well, but Jason had we were talking about Michael Gallup and how it's bizarre to me how undervalued Michael Gallup is right now because they drafted CeeDee Lamb. I get it. They took the best player on the board. He's still a rookie, and there's still 160 targets that were vacated between Randall Cobb and Jason Witten. Like, there's room for CeeDee Lamb to come in, and Michael Gallup is still awesome. But the stat I looked at for Gallup was the hit rate of sophomore wide receivers who hit 1,100 receiving yards is unbelievable. If you have the time and you know how to use Pro Football Reference, go check it out. It is a murderer's row of just absolute studs who hit this threshold. Jason took that and looked at the threshold of rookie running backs that hit 1,100 rushing yards their first year. And his biggest takeaway from that was you see generally a massive target increase for that running back going into their sophomore year, because that's everything for Jacobs. Will he get the targets? He has the ability. Will that opportunity, like I was talking about, opportunity drives everything. Will the opportunity of targets really open up for Josh Jacobs? It should. We're falling into the rational coach trap that it should, but we have history now that shows that, and I think it's just, if a running back is good and they're on the field and they're producing, they just start getting involved in other aspects of the game. There's a couple busts, like Jeremy Hill, who was awesome his rookie year, and then just got Thanos snapped into the universe. But so those are the two guys I want to throw out, as I really believe in them breaking out from like those second round picks who you could be talking about as a top 5 pick next year.
I love both calls. In particular, I really love the Drake one too. I mean, the running back for that section of time when he was with that second half of the year with the Cardinals. So already a glove-like fit. That's why I love the point about the, they invested a lot in him without even knowing they'd have gotten rid of David Johnson's exorbitant contract. And now you add, he's a touchdown machine already, but if, the Kyler Murray blow-up happens that we were just talking about, the offense takes that next step. I mean, the guy was already on pace for, I think, a touchdown a game right about there. And this case, the offense gets that much more explosive. There's real 15, maybe even 20 touchdown upside there. So I think that is fantastic. And they've talked, the Raiders, all offseason about upping that workload for the pass game. I mean, they brought back Rashard. They drafted, Bowden, but why would either of those guys, rationally keep a Josh Jacobs?
That's what I'm saying. We fall into the rational coach trap.
Exactly.
It happens every year, but I believe in Jacobs. I believe that the targets will. They're not going to be what we think they should be, but it won't be the garbage that he got last year.
Right. Even just a slight uptick, because every rushing metric, I mean, that dude checks all the different boxes, yards after contact, everything. And he is a good receiver. He was a great receiver in college. Like, it's not like he's incapable. And my pick, that's why I love this kind of group of running backs, because there's so many potential breakouts. And another one in there, Austin Ekeler. I mean, one, just the picture the other day.
That's my dude, man.
That picture of him, holy crap. Like, there just seems to be shades of the Christian McCaffrey, whereas the coaches talk about a committee coming into it, and then you see a picture of the guy looking completely yoked out of his mind, getting ready for just that full workload if and when it happens. And man, when he gets the full workload, like there's no one better. I mean, he only trailed Christian McCaffrey for those first 4 weeks when Melvin Gordon was out. And now Melvin Gordon's removed completely. And I get they talk up Jonathan Jackson. They draft Josh Kelly in round 3. I think Austin Ekeler is just going to prove I'm too good to take off the field. Even if you put these guys in, they already said, we'll split him out wide. We'll put him in the slot. He is such a versatile, just crazy threat that if we get that crazy workload he was getting for those first 4 weeks, and I don't see why you wouldn't. The offense seemed to hum better, honestly, when Melvin Gordon was out and Ekeler was the featured back. 39.4, the RB2 first week, 23.3, the RB4, 15.1, his lowest total, RB18, still solid, and 29.2, the RB4 for those first 4 weeks. And there is a very real scenario that just plays out all year, and yet he still falls to oftentimes late round 2 because he's pigeonholed as just a receiving back, and he can't get it done. Well, hopefully that picture kind of woke people up. This guy is yoked. He could handle 20 touches a game if they so choose to give it to him. And I think he'll thrive. So I want to bet on that kind of upside scenario that Ekeler does get the work I think he deserves. And I think a lot of, like you said, everybody thinks he deserves. I totally love Ekeler to take that leap and be a top 5 running back in a lot of leagues next year. And as a later guy, because I know we've talked a lot about the second round tier, that's going to be tricky to sift through this year. I actually do auction drafts, and my strategy coming in is like, I want 3 of those guys because everyone will blow all their money early on the Dalvin Cooks, the Henrys, the McCaffreys. I hope I can kind of sneak in and just snipe 3 of those guys. Maybe the 3 guys we just talked about. I would love that to roll in. But in terms of a later breakout, you mentioned Mostert earlier as your kind of 0 RB guy. I think that could have worked out pretty nice for you. Finally, that the contract's kind of resolved and he's got some incentives to now earn. He's not going to be disgruntled with the team. He's going to be motivated to get to all the money he can. He is just as glove-like of a fit as you can possibly ask for that Shanahan scheme. He sees the hole so well. Once he sees it, he zips through. And I mean, it's a beautiful thing to watch. There's been so many no names that have made monsters. I mean, Mostert kind of being the latest example for that last stretch of the year where he was the running back 8 in fantasy. Once he kind of finally started to get the work there, I wouldn't be shocked if he kind of, all it takes is 10 to 12 touches in his game splits. If you use that awesome tool on RotoViz where you can check out, how someone does when they get certain workloads.
Right.
I looked at, only 9 carries a game, and he was on pace for 250 fantasy points on any time he's gotten 9 carries or more. That would have been the running back 6 last year. I just don't see, and especially with, Breida now gone too, how he doesn't see 10 to 12. Maybe McKinnon comes back. But to me, there's just a lot of upside for a guy that falls to, 6 sometimes even 7. If you get that Shanahan gold mine and you can go after it that late, he's a polarizing guy. Are you on Team Mostert or are you kind of against him?
I'm on because this is why you track fantasy football year round. Like Mostert was projecting early on to be a 4th round pick because he still had the buzz of the end of the season. He still had the buzz of the playoffs carrying his draft price. And it was like, wow, man, 4th round, you got to leave some room for error that you're wrong on these players that like Tevin Coleman gets far more work than you're anticipating, than you're projecting. You got to leave that margin. And in the 4th round, it felt like that margin was just not there. And it's been wild to watch him drop. Dude, you're right. I've seen him going in the 6th round sometimes now. And it's, well, yes, okay, now I'm in. Of what the upside of Mostert could be, even if Tevin Coleman gets some more work. 6th round, I'm absolutely good with it.
Love it. And moving on to the pass catchers now, the breakout wide receivers every year. You know, we saw Godwin, like we already alluded to last year. There's always a handful of wide receivers that just explode up. And, you know, the next year you're seeing them going round 2, or again, whatever the relative breakout is. Who are a couple guys you have on your list, or one or two receivers that you see taking that next step, that next tier jump?
Sure. I really like Ridley and McLaurin as breakout wide receivers. Jason would of course say Hollywood Brown.
Mm-hmm.
I get it. I get what people see in Hollywood Brown. That's a tougher one for me to project, but for me, McLaurin was, I mean, one, he was awesome as a rookie, and most people missed on McLaurin, and I think a lot of that had to do with Kelvin Harmon, because we go into, you know, the dynasty people. We have our rookie ranks going into the NFL draft, and then the NFL draft generally takes your rankings for the and then throws it in a paper shredder and just destroys you. But you're like, man, but I believed in these players so much. And Kelvin Harmon's one of those guys that a lot of people loved as one of the top wide receiver prospects. I mean, it's the same thing, same story with Hakeem Butler. I mean, you know, Hakeem Butler was awesome in college, and dynasty, we all were like, well, this guy will be a top 5 wide receiver. And then he completely tanks, falls in the draft, becomes nobody. But the people liked Calvin Harmon, and I think Washington took him in like the 5th round. Meanwhile, they took Terry McLaurin in the 3rd round, and there was unfortunately some just the missing of, they took McLaurin in the 3rd round. Like they value him. They don't value Kelvin Harmon anywhere close to what they value McLaurin. And then it was, okay, let's dive back in. We weren't expecting a ton from McLaurin. And then you go, oh, this dude is really freaking fast.
Yeah.
Okay. And let's look at, okay, he's got a pretty solid production profile. I overlooked McLaurin. My bad. Let's pick him up as a late round pick. And then just goes hamburglar in week 1 with Case Keenum. Now, I get that people are a bit worried about Dwayne Haskins, which is fair. Dwayne Haskins, in his first few starts, Haskins looked really bad. Now, he did improve as the season went along. And what's funny is you actually look at the splits of before Haskins was the full-time starter with McLaurin, and after, his average, his splits are like the same. His touchdowns, the touchdowns are down. I won't lie about that, and that's because Haskins wasn't as good as the quarterback play he was receiving, but receptions per game, the same. Yards per game, right around the same. So we shouldn't let the idea that Dwayne Haskins is the starter scare you off of Terry McLaurin, and that's reflected to me in the draft price of Terry McLaurin, because it was he was such a stud as a rookie wide receiver. People are so scared of Haskins, and my analysis is, even if Haskins is as bad as he was last year, McLaurin's still going to be good.
Right.
Okay. What happens if Haskins is a little bit better?
Mm-hmm.
That's an uptick for Terry McLaurin's ceiling. And now we have like the Hail Mary of all Hail Marys. What if Alex Smith is the quarterback for Washington, which a year ago is impossible. You know, Alex Smith is on dynasty waiver wires because the dude had an injury that you don't come back from that injury. Like they said he almost died. And look, I'm not here to judge whether or not the man should go back to football, but he wants to. So go play football, young man. And like, Alex Smith is very, very good. Just saying, I don't think Alex Smith is going to start. Having talked about this, we're just going to throw out some narratives. My point is simply, I think the quarterback play will be better for McLaurin than people are projecting. And they're letting McLaurin slip in the drafts for a dude who was just absolutely awesome. And how about this? What if McLaurin gets better too?
Right.
I mean, imagine that world. So I like McLaurin to take that next step to really be a breakout, even though he kind of broke out, but by my definition of breakout, take another tier jump up for fantasy.
I think he's a fantastic call. A lot of, again, smart wolves that have been on this show. It seems like everyone's aligned on this guy, and yet his his price
but
remains.
the ADP doesn't reflect it. Yeah.
I don't get that. I don't get why all these great minds are building a positive drumbeat for him, and he's still getting taken as the wide receiver 26, which he finished as in the worst case scenario last year, as you just highlighted. Like all these different like if you just took him there and he finishes there, great. But there's so many different positive narratives that could bend the right way. Haskins has been working his ass off all off season, his lowest body fat he's ever heard. If he does take that 7, he was really good in college, and these two are together in college too.
Right.
I mean, there's definitely some interesting narratives. Now you get away from that Bill Callahan interim, run-centric, just like old school offense, and you bring in Scott Turner. We don't know exactly what that will look like, but an Air Coryell system, if he follows what his dad did, I mean, you saw all the seasons that Vincent Jackson and Josh Gordon, who Scott Turner was the receivers coach in Cleveland for that one season where he blew up and lit up the world, led the league in receiving. I mean, he knows how to use a long, fast guy. I really think with no competition really added, only removed because Calvin Harmon, we were talking about, gets hurt.
Yeah.
I mean, Antonio Gibson, some gadget players will get the manufactured touches, which I love. I like it. I like him a lot. I don't think that comes at the expense of McLaurin at all. I totally aboard this one. I think he could definitely light up football, and at his price, it's crazy. Right in that range, a guy I love is DK Metcalf. I mean, it's pretty easy to love a guy that is built at you could have drawn up. You can't even draw up how great this guy's specimen. It's just ridiculous.
You can't draw that many muscles.
Exactly. It made in a complete lab. And he just, I think, showed he can run a lot more routes than people were giving him credit for last year, especially in the playoffs. You see him set the records there for the playoff. It seems he really found his groove. Now, is he always going to be strapped to a run-heavy attack that just never fully lets Russ do his thing? I hope not. I mean, God, if that offense ever just unleashed Russ in a way that, Andy Reid uses Mahomes, the results would be crazy for Metcalf and Lockett. So there is that ceiling narrative. They've talked about using more no huddle, pushing the pace a little bit more. Carroll always says those type of things to get us excited and never really comes through on his promise. Does. But even if not, I mean, this guy is just the definition of a freak athlete that I mean, even on the limited volume, he already showed really well as a rookie. And I wouldn't be shocked. I love Greg Kosel over at Fantasy Points. And he kind of ended his film breakdown of him after listing out, this guy ran this route that nobody said he could. This guy did this and this. He asked at the end, why can't this guy be Julio Jones if he sees the volume? And he has all the tools if he keeps taking another step, and that's a guy I really trust and like. The other one was DJ Moore. I had listed again. Late round 3, early 4, but in that Joe Brady offense, that's all about speed and space, get the ball in their hands and let them do their thing. Teddy Bridgewater, now a much better quarterback. I mean, this guy lit it up already last year with Kyle Allen throwing him the ball. And I don't think Bridgewater is this ridiculous talent, but I think the offensive scheme coming in is perfect for
He's
DJ
much
Moore.
better than – it's okay to say that he's better than Kyle Allen because he is better than Kyle Allen.
A huge jump above, even if he's not great himself. Exactly. So to me, I just see DJ Moore taking that next step, going towards that 3-4 turn, but then coming in next year, if he led the league in receiving yards this year, I wouldn't even be shocked because of just how great this offense is going to be for the skill set he brings to the table. So those are a couple of guys I see leaping to the next tier. It seemed like you were kind of in agreement with both of them.
Yes.
Yep.
I like both those guys.
Excellent. And wrap it up here now with, the tight end position. There's certainly been some interesting breakouts the last few years, Mark Andrews being the most recent. Do you have a breakout tight end that you love for 2020?
Oh, come on now. It's Blake Jarwin. If anybody follows me anywhere,
yes,
in fantasy football,
I should have
known. you know that I'm pushing Blake Jarwin. I've pushed my chips in, and they're all in on Blake Jarwin. Tight ends don't have to have draft capital. They don't have to be first round picks to come through. Tight ends take time to develop, and I've seen enough flashes when I'm watching Blake Jarwin to go, man, if that dude had an opportunity, I think that he would really be able to get it done. What do we have here for Blake Jarwin? A massive opportunity upgrade here. 8.9 yards per target for this team, where they've been dealing with Jason Witten at 6.4 yards per target the last 2 years. And Dak would still target him all the time because Witten is there on the field. You have Dak, who almost hit 5,000 passing yards last year in one of the best offenses in football. Yes, there's a lot of talent on there, but there's a lot of yards and a lot of touchdowns to go around with that. I guess I mentioned how, Cobb and Jason Witten, that's 166 targets that are gone from this team. That maybe it doesn't hit. Maybe the passing volume goes down, but let's say, now there's 120 targets that need to be filled. And Blake Jarwin was still on the field, last year. He was still involved in that process. So if we can get him up to the volume of work that Jason Witten was getting, you're going to have a usable tight end for fantasy who's going essentially undrafted in most home leagues. Since the year 2000, he is one of 7 tight ends to have a game of 100 yards and 3 touchdowns, 100 or more yards. And that's what I mean when I was talking about Jack Doyle. Can Jack Doyle hit a game of 103?
No.
I don't know. Here's the part where I forget that he's actually on the list.
Yeah.
and I look like a buffoon. But the point is, not many guys, when given the opportunity, can really do that. And then on top of that, they gave Jarwin the bag. It's not an elite bag, but this is a tight end that they've said, you're the future, you're the starter for this team. You're going to be on the field for and they like I said, the offense is incredible. The shift that happened last year, and they've kept the same team, the same scheme intact, even though they're going to go with Mike McCarthy for some reason as the head coach. But for a guy that costs nothing in the draft, of what I believe Blake Jarwin could become, he's an auto smash every time I'm in a draft.
I don't see any reason to argue that one. I mean, the argument is always too many mouths to feed, but when the pie is as big, you can still get a small slice and it's still enough to fill you up in fantasy, especially the type of volume he could see. This offense is not going to come off the field without points all too often. I don't know how you defend this offense. So when he's drawing the 4th best coverage and he's as athletic as he is, I love it, especially how often I think they're going to be in the red zone. And we know him and Dak have some of that chemistry already established in the red zone area. There's, even if it's only, 600 yards at the end of the day, because the pie is spread out, there's still 9-10 touchdowns that could come with that. And that tight end, what else do you want, especially when it's going that late? So I think that's a great pick. And I think in general, there's a ton of breakout tight ends this year. It's probably why I'm going to wait on the position a bit. I love Jonnu Smith in Tennessee. Gesicki's a freak athlete. Noah Fant, all these interesting names. The one I find myself landing, although his price is starting to really creep up, and I don't know if I'm going to keep going in where it is. Now. Yeah, Hayden Hurst, now a top 10 tight end in ADP. I loved him when he was tight end 16 and kind of just hovering in early drafts. But even at tight end 10, I wouldn't be shocked if this guy still beats that price, which would be a hefty ask. But I love that cutter scheme for tight ends. We saw it with the Buccaneers. I mean, we saw it it just works out so well. We saw it last year with Austin Hooper. We saw it with Tony Gonzalez for years when Cutter was there before. And he just, somebody asked him about that. He's like, how do all these tight ends just keep breaking out? He's like, I'm the first to admit that I like tight ends, was his actual answer to it. So he's not hiding the fact that he schemes a lot of his offense to the seam stretchers. They lose Hooper and they go out of their way to make sure they get a guy that could potentially fill that void.
Yeah, they traded a second for him.
A hefty draft capital. I mean, you're not giving that up without having some very clear visions. And, Hurst has been driving up from Florida to work out with Matt Ryan all offseason. So that shows kind of his commitment to really taking that step. Ryan's already kind of raved about it, saying, I love that he's that willing to put in such an effort to get to that great level. He's got this great speed, great athleticism, wants to be a great player, mismatch problem, maybe the most athletic, fastest tight ends I've ever played with. That's pretty high praise for a guy that played with Hooper, played with Gonzalez, and has maximized those guys throughout their career. So even as this price tends to creep up, there's still a ton of upside because he's just going to stretch the seam so well in this offense. You saw it with OJ Howard and even Cameron Brate for a while with the Bucs. That's one of the coaching narratives that I do buy into is Cutter using those tight ends. So I do really like Hayden Hurst. Are you kind of avoiding him now that the price is going up, or is there still a scenario you see yourself landing him?
Probably not.
Yeah.
Because you're like you said that the price has gone up. So when you're taking a tight end at that range, like your margin for error starts to shrink, and where I'm bypassing an upside skill position player in the 9th or whatever to make sure that I can get Hayden Hurst on the team. I agree with you that, Matt Ryan's a yardage machine. We do have a couple years, the gap between Tony Gonzalez and Austin Hooper actually breaking out where the tight end really wasn't a factor in this offense. But when you're talking about Dirk Cutter and tight ends, it definitely makes sense to me.
Absolutely. And that kind of wraps up our breakouts. There's definitely more within the Ultimate Draft Kit. So make sure you check it out if you'd like to see some more breakouts, guys that are going to take that leap into the next tier or two above them. We're now going to wrap up. If you have the time to do the no huddle offense, you want to power through it with me?
Let's go.
Awesome, man. So it's just going to be fill in the blank, just whatever name. If you end up wanting to expand on someone, you're welcome to, but it's meant to just kind of fire through. And we're just going to start at the top with after McCaffrey. And now I'm going to add Saquon because everybody always says Saquon. So after McCaffrey and Saquon, who should go third overall?
Zeke.
The next Dalvin Cook or round 2 running back who ends up top 5 in 2021 will be?
I think it's Josh Jacobs.
What is the favorite fantasy team name that you've either had or seen before?
Demarius Targaryen.
Love that. That's fantastic. Game of Thrones right there. Next, Chris Godwin or round 4 to 5 wide receiver then explodes into the elite will be?
Let's see. I'm trying to make